Um, and I remember when I was going through my decision to quit government, and I had lots of people saying, I could never do this. There's no way I could do that. You're crazy, like whatever. They come with all of their own fears and judgments and perceptions of life that they're built into their lens. And when you offer your advice based on your fears and worries, now you have a different view of whatever that situation is. So I think there's so much danger in giving somebody advice based on your personal view of life that they're so much better off being where they are, allowing them to explore from their vantage point what they want to do, and you ask the questions that support and surround them and providing that better view for themselves. How do we want to proceed with this?
I
Do you want me
like
to start with a little setup piece?
Yeah,
Ian?
let's do that because we're gonna do a short video
I'm going to try to say
on the
that.
practice of gifting advice, right?
Yeah. And I wanted to start by the why we've chosen to do a practice around this and talk about gifting advice versus the giving advice. There's a bit of a metaphor around this, is that with the work we do in peer coaching circles and in our coaching capacity training, as people are learning to practice using coaching in their conversations, they often feel they're abandoning the person by not giving them some advice when they feel this advice would be helpful to support that person in their topic. And so you and I were talking a while ago saying, what if we are we handcuffing humans by, because we know there's a conversation dance and we bounce around. There's times where there may be gifting advice is the right thing to put on to present or to offer. And those are words I'm going to use today. So what if we helped our coaching resources that are developing their muscles think about gifting advice, and what would that look like in a practice? And I know you had some thoughts around that to start us off, Ian.
Yeah, so one of the things that I thought about when we first discussed this was, who is this advice for? Is this advice because I think that that's where this person needs to go? Is it is it is it making me feel good to be able to give this advice to somebody, or do I trust that they really have the answer inside of themselves? So I wonder if even somebody took a few minutes or even a night to sleep on it, is this advice worth gifting to somebody? Or is it really just for me? And just to take the time to let it marinate, to see if it's something that really needs to leave your head and your thoughts and to be presented to that person. Because if we really trust that we all have the best answers inside of ourselves for ourselves, then we trust that that other person has that as well. And when we're in our coaching conversations, we're trying to elicit and help them unearth those answers for themselves. So just taking that time away, taking that pause, just like when you write that response email that has lots of tone and whatever in it, that overnight thought, that overnight sleeping on your email generally changes the tone of what you give, usually to save your own ass. but in this case, we're saving that other person from giving that advice when it may not be required.
I have a story. When a number of years ago, when I was still working in an office, I called her my wall mate. She was on the other side of my baffle, and we had to make a really important decision. Our office was splitting in two. One of them was moving down to I worked for Veterans Affairs, moving down to an army base, and one was staying where we were. And we had to decide where we wanted to go. And she asked me if I would coach her. She specifically knew, like, I just need you to coach me. I don't want you to tell me what to do. And so we went in the boardroom and I coached her, and she was listen to my little voice. In my opinion, she was making the wrong decision. And she was making the decision to stay. She was a mother of 5, single mom of 5. And I had a pretty strong inclination that our office would be slated to close in the not too distant future, just by what I was seeing happening in the organization. And every fiber of my being wanted to tell her not to do that, to go. But I didn't. I trusted the process. And it's not my journey. And she's the CEO of her life. And she went home that night, and I went home and came in the next morning. And she says, guess what? I'm going to go move down to the base. I've made a decision. I thought, oh my gosh. So I got up from my baffle, looked up and said, what happened? And she said, I went home last night and the toilet broke. And I thought, that's enough. I'm selling this house and getting away. And it just reminded me that she needed that night's sleep to make a really important decision. I think the toilet was a metaphor for like just something needed to happen to move her out of that fear of, doing something, moving away. And then the second thing I want to say, because for a couple of years, we were in different offices and still shared conversations. And it was, if I hadn't made her stay, it was the wrong decision for her to stay or go, or for her to go. If I had tried to convince her to go then, some of the things that happened to her, she might have been saying to me, why did you tell me I should go? Right? I thought, oh man, like it's so important that people own their own decisions. And it is like, there were all kinds of questions that I asked her that allowed her to expand the view of all the choices on the table. I created a space for her to have a broad view of both, and asking her questions so she could answer that and see what it looked like as a whole. And she was discerning her right path. But man, what a lesson for me as a coach, because I don't know how many times I went to the washroom that day and was marching back to her desk to tell her, you're making the wrong decision. And I'm so glad I didn't do it.
If we think about relationship possibilities and action is advice is in the action mode. So to my earlier point, and to answer Ian's question a bit, is it for who is it? Is it for me? Is it for them? It could be any of the above. It depends on where we are in that conversation and the amount of listening we're doing at that time, and asking, what do you need? What do you need from me? And where is this conversation going? And asking permission. Of course, asking that permission to go somewhere is probably checking a lot of boxes as far as letting the person know that you're listening, because it says, I heard what you said and I've taken it. And now I'm asking, do you want to come with me over here? But it also, even when there is something that looks like advice, it can be an invitation rather than pure advice. It can be an invitation to explore in the possibilities realm. So sometimes when we say going back, instead of a pure action of, hey, you should do this, which is pure advice, sometimes it can be just in the possibilities realm, in the exploration. I'm always amazed how, when people actually get to their own advice, and sometimes I'll engage in the next question was, what do you need to execute on that solution that you just put forward? And very often the response is, I don't know. Maybe that's where the gifting comes in the form of that invitation to explore. Who do you need? What do you need? What do you need to prepare? If this was right now, what would that look like?
The difference with that, Mark, though, is that you're getting them to expand on their own idea already.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't necessarily see it as giving advice at that stage, but you're giving them a broader view of their decision. So you're exploring their idea, as opposed to, you know what I would do if I was you? This is what I would do.
Yeah.
There's there's so much peril with that. What would I do in your situation?
Mhm.
And I remember when I was going through my decision to quit government, and I had lots of people saying, I could never do this. There's no way I could do that. You're crazy, like whatever. They come with all of their own fears and judgments and perceptions of life that they've built into their lens. And when you offer your advice based on your fears and worries, now you have a different view of whatever that situation is. So I think there's so much danger in giving somebody advice based on your personal view of life, that they're so much better off being where they are, allowing them to explore from their vantage point what they want to do, and you ask the questions that support and surround them and providing that better view for themselves.
If I felt just compelled to share something that I thought would be of value, call that advice. The thing when I gift it is you need to drop it into their hands and say, can I throw something at you? And then throw it to them. But the first thing I ask is, what's your reaction to that? Like, I literally have no attachment to what I just said. And let them sit with it for a minute. And sometimes that sparks something. And here's what I have to be prepared to do if I'm going to gift or offer, is to let mine go. It may take an entirely different shape. It may go in a direction like this, even if I've gifted over and I need to abandon, is my word, my attachment. Because now maybe it's propelled them into a direction. They might say that wouldn't work because, and I say, well, what do you think would work? So you can propel them. But I think it's very important. We get very attached to, if we feel compelled to. And you said someone said offer. And I think that's very important, that it's if you feel compelled to. But what I will say, and what I do know based on the coaching work that I've done, is that what it does in that other person when you start to give advice is they go to another part of their brain. You close down possibilities and creativity. Because now you've given them something and now they're in the head and analyzing. So kind of what we were talking about earlier, Mark, like we move them from just kind of experiencing and full body experience of their topic, and now they're back up in their head and analyzing your advice and trying to discern what would work for them and if they like it or not. So we move them away from that energy of just being fully in their topic and exploring it fully. We might start to accidentally narrow their pathway forward, because there's, this, when you're in a place of possibility, that sounds like a lot of fun. Sometimes it's like you say it all the time, Mark, you start to see what needs to happen, and it can be very hard, the action you have to take. So we can actually take them away from the trajectory of where they want to go, or need to go for them, based on what they are currently saying they need, want.
That key of being not attached to your advice is huge. I'm sure you've bought a gift for somebody at Christmas and I know they're going to love this, and they open it up and you're like, oh. If your heart sinks, you are attached to what you thought would happen. So if they don't take your advice or they don't run with it, you have to be okay with it. And it's totally fine. I understand though that if there is a resonance with the offered advice, maybe there is some opening up to explore what that could look like. But being totally detached from what that person does or doesn't do with it needs to be the case, because it's their path, it's their journey to walk.
I was thinking of so many situations where I've gone into when I've put that foot forward and said, hey, what about this? To the earlier point, it's not my risk. It's not my gain. It's not my consequences. It's not my rewards. And it's not my journey. So it could be my perspective and my solution. But if not accompanied with that verification that you so eloquently put, Karen, how's this lying with you? I can see it closing down too. Absolutely.
Just thinking of another example that just came up last night. I was with somebody a few weeks ago, and they were talking about a situation with their children, and specifically their son. And I had talked about a book I read when I was a young mom, for when I was raising Cole, and it was called Raising Cain. And I mentioned it to her, and I just said I found it really helpful. It helped me understand boys. I really felt it helped my relationship with Cole. I never sent her the link. I never sent her the book to read. I never followed up with her. We were in conversation. It was just actually it was a get together at someone else's place. And we were just catching up. And last night I got a text from her. What's that book? You told me a book and I'd really like to know the name of that book. So I didn't push my agenda. She came to me. Weeks later, she decided that was something she wanted to explore. And even when I sent the link, I just said, look, it's something I read many years ago. It's an older, I just know it supported me. So very important, right? Lots of people will follow up. Remember, when I got coached on the business card, they want to they'll push you to even do it. After the coaching conversation, they start sending you links. Here's where you can go and get your business card made up, which in fact is not what I needed to do at that time.
And I think that's part of, I think that's part of that process, right? You have this idea because that's the topic and that's what we're focused on. And then when you do your uncovering in the conversation, the business card was never the real issue in the situation. It was a relationship conversation that needed to take place. But if you're stuck on the topic that I came with, or that she came with, was, I don't know how to get my business card out. The advice is flying for the topic, but it wasn't the real topic. Sorry, in this case, we weren't coaching the person at that point. That person is advising on the topic itself. And you didn't need advice there because that's not where you were stuck.
What do you guys do when we stop in the conversation and we say, what do you need from me right
Sorry,
now?
Siri's jumping in.
The person is advising on the topic itself.
Siri, I want to hear what Siri has to say.
She has advice always.
I already turned it off, but it was she was responding exactly to that.
So Ian, keep going with Siri. Karen, you put ChatGPT on, and let's let him duke it out and see what happens.
See who wins.
But okay, so here's the deal. You're in a conversation and you stop and you say, okay, what do you need from me right now? And the person says, I need advice.
That's funny because that happened in one of the last sessions that Karen and I did. It was like one of the first questions that was requested, and our last instruction was, we're not giving or receiving advice. And the first thing it was said is, I work best when I get advice. Can I get advice on blah blah blah? It's an action habit that we have because we want to get stuff done, and we want to make sure that things, we don't want to, we reward people for taking action so much in the life that we currently live in. It's act, react, act, react. Okay, we've got to get through this to get to this and get to that. And it's uncomfortable for people to sit in the I don't know. So the biggest gift that we can give people, I think, initially, is to explore the I don't know. And if it ends up becoming this is really what they want, okay, maybe that's where it ends up going. But I think we need to, at least when we're exploring and supporting people and having coaching conversations, is to explore the I don't knows.
You go, Karen, then I'll give my answer to my own question.
Because of the listening that I do, and I've attended, and we teach this practice of writing keywords down, or kind of where their progress is, and they've been writing down things themselves. I say, take a look. What do you see right now that you already know? And what is the piece of advice that you need? So that they can get pretty specific on what they want. And for me, it's always then, who is someone that you can trust in your world right now that you can go and talk to about that? Because at the end of the day, when we hang up the phone or get off the Zoom call or leave the office, unless I'm their immediate sphere of influence, I'm one of their go-to advice people, really getting them to see what's around them, because that's a possibility question. Who can give you the best advice? Who's the person that's going to be able to accompany you, has the knowledge, the intel, whatever?
Yeah.
So I often will move it towards them. I want them to discern. And I have had people that I've coached that said, actually, I want your opinion right now. I value yours. And I can say, that's when I will talk about, well, what's coming up for me right now is this. I said, I want you to think about that. It's something that I'm noticing. And it's something I've noticed. What's your reaction to that? And typically that will get people unstuck.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very unattached to my advice these days, more and more. I'm not sure I have a lot to give anymore as far as advice, only because I've seen when people find their own kind of sense of a way forward for themselves, that's enough to give them the attractions to take that next step. Do they need reassurance sometimes? Then you can say, well, if you do that, what's the biggest worry you have? What's the thing that you're worrying might happen? Is there any fear? So you start to see what's holding them back from their own wise discernment of what they need to do next. I really respect wise discernment. And I've seen it in small children, right up to old people. It is not aged. It's not an age thing. I can do it with my 4-year-old grandson. It's like, you're a pretty freaking wise kid and you're 4 years old when I ask you.
I typically don't have systematic responses to situations. I'm pretty well, let's follow the person and let's feed off of what they're telling me. But when somebody says I need advice, I typically have 3 consecutive questions. The first one is, if I were to give you advice, how would you know the advice I gave you worked? And that reveals a lot. Then I say, what are you not willing to do before I give you advice? And then my third question is, what are you willing to do? After that third one, I don't need to give advice, because they have answered it. They've flushed out. My only support after that, if there's a complimentary 4 question, is, what do you need for that journey? It is kind of a quick RPA, because how would you know the advice I gave you talks about what's important for them and how does the outcome look like? What are you not willing to do usually brings them into what they've tried and didn't work and what they don't want to try and what they're afraid of, which flushes out some possibilities. And then the third one, which is what are you willing to do, opens up possibilities and moves into action. So it's one of the only times I have systematic, because at one point I asked a question here, because at one point it was, what do you need from me right now? And I remember when I first heard that from Ian, I go, what happens if they say I need advice? And I went into holy crap mode, because I said, what do you do then? So I kind of played it out in my head and saying, how do I support the person if they're really dead set on advice? And I really know that my advice is not going to serve them. That was fun.
Are you still going to give advice?
If what?
Are you still going to give advice?
But based on that, yeah. You know, giving advice it has its place. It depends. It's the adult diaper syndrome. It depends. Let's see what giving advice and then saying good luck with that. No. But an invitation to their own version of the advice I'm giving, possibly.
It depends what role I'm in and what the what conversation I'm in. And I'm not. I just what came up when you asked that question. You said that is, I think my practice is to wait longer than I need to. I think I need to give advice. Like, stop giving advice too soon if I am going to wait long enough and let that conversation, like let that person, expand. Give them that space. So jumping to advice too quickly is not a practice I'm moving away from, and I've done that better and better as the years have gone on.
So not only is giving advice not necessarily useful because it's your advice and it's their journey, but at a deeper level and a more practical level, when I gave advice, I'm not increasing their capacity to handle this in 6 months from now. So very few things we're going to meet in our life are we the first person to meet it. And very few things we're going to meet in our life is it the last time we're going to meet it. So let's make it so that you can handle this on your own next time. And let's start that journey now.
Yeah, that's the tying your shoe analogy. If I keep tying the shoe for you over and over again, you're not going to learn. But if you start to work through it and figure it out, and the bunny and the loop and the tree and whatever, like you gotta be in it a little bit and find your way, right? And by giving them the answer all the time, they don't build up that capacity.
A metaphor that came up for me is when a baby's trying to walk, the last thing you can, letting go of their fingers and letting them fall down and learn. The practice isn't actually just learning how to walk. It's learning how to fall down and pull yourself back up. But if you keep lifting the child up, they're not learning to walk because they're going to fall down. So this practice of allowing that muscle of trying something out, taking your own risks, seeing what happens, come back and learn. So that's what struck me when you're talking about tying your shoes. We do this with our children to create independence and capacity building. And then we become grown adults and we think we have to give people advice all the time. Just curious with how that showed up for me.
That's funny. So I should be thanking my brother for when I was trying to learn how to walk, he would trip me. Like I would stand up and he would trip me. I would stand up, he would trip me. So he's the reason I'm like such a good walker now.
Perhaps.
I'll have to thank him for that.
So yeah, it's the practice of just gifting advice, to be aware of how it shows up and how to, what that offer looks like and how to navigate that internally for you. And also to support the person that you're, as Marcus talked about, really supporting building capacity, which is what coaching does.